the catastrophes will be so real and the discourse will be so poor that people will need something else, and we have to be there in a stoic way and a strategic way, and talking in a way that we take into account the problems, but make clear that there are ecological solutions, uh, political solutions, cultural solutions, spiritual solutions, psychological solutions. Well, solutions is a big word. I don't like that word. In French, I have a much more diverse vocabulary, but you know what I mean.
I do.
It's an approach. It's a way to behave. It's disposition.
Alain Deneault can't seem to avoid trouble. From his book on the harm done by the Canadian mining industry to the crippling of world economies by corporate tax havens, he continually holds people to account in a rather unassuming yet meticulous way. I was struck in meeting him by his humanity and his commitment. He no longer flies due to environmental impact. He finds silenced voices and figures out how to make them heard. He believes in something more and better than just the self, and he lives it. It's not admiration so much as seeing someone with enough resolve to live as they speak. I hope you enjoy. This is The Other Pod. How's stuff on your side of the world?
Uh, well,
It
the
can't be
big
as bad as
question.
it is here, right?
Uh, well, I live in the Maritimes,
Yeah.
in Far East Canada, in
Yeah.
a French community there.
Yes.
And we're sort of a bit on the margins of world disorder. I mean, we see it as if we were a bit forgotten in that.
Forgotten or excluded from? Like, meaning, is it a choice you're not part of it, or is it they didn't invite you to the
Well,
table?
the communities as such are both. I mean,
Okay.
forgotten was more like indifference.
Okay.
But sometimes if you have uh, political powers
Yeah.
that don't serve you but exploit you, it might be a good thing to be the object of indifference.
No, I mean, honestly, uh I feel jealous of a lot of different things these days, but I think not watching what we're watching as part of our country and the behaviors of our country is it's very difficult. I think especially when you were raised with the specter of like World War I, World War II, what we did in Vietnam, all these things, right? Like you're raised with that as a backdrop. And
Yeah.
then you see what we're doing in particular to the Latin community on our own soil. It's very hard to understand how this can be happening. And it's also incredibly difficult to find all of the modes that you have to fight back against it are so profoundly limited. And the most you can do is on a like human to human interaction, but the people in power won't do anything.
Yeah.
And sort of
Well,
the emotional and financial debt that we owe to the people that we've done this to. Like that's the part I find. I don't know how you make this right. So I'd
it's a
rather
whole.
be indifferent, right, than
Yeah.
there.
Well, we see it, and we have the social effects of these phenomenon.
Yeah.
Without the vulgarity and the cruelty of all this. There's a buffer, let's say,
Yeah.
between us where we are now as a small community in Eastern Canada
Yeah.
and what's happening in the world. But sometimes we feel also very uh, passive and weak.
Yeah.
in front of all this. It's hard to behave, to be in a social activity. But I try to
Yeah.
do it by writing, and I have a very good setup here for that.
Yes. Doesn't look like there's a lot of other things going on. You probably get like a deer or a badger, something out the window, and it's like you could focus, which is great.
Yeah.
Well, I think, part of what drew a lot of things drew me to your work, but a large part of it is, which we will get into, um, is how, given what you see about the world and what you understand and what you look at specifically and in detail, how do you do that and not fall into sort of a chasm of despair? And I know when we corresponded, part of my question was going to be, are there solutions for everything that you look into? Or is a large part of it documenting simply that this is what as a race of people we're doing? Because the cruelty and the inequity could be remedied, but it's not. So that was a question I'm very much interested in what your ideas will be, but we can get there. Do you mind if I set a little groundwork, and then with people such as you, where people may not be familiar with terms or people may not know intellectual concepts about what you've discussed, I will ask very rudimentary questions, just so if you don't mind fleshing that out. So if someone's interested, they won't feel like they have no idea what's going on. Is that okay?
Yeah, fine.
Will you talk to me some about being French Canadian,
Yeah.
how the country itself influenced you, how you came to philosophy, and who were some of the initial minds that shaped your
Okay.
present understanding?
Um, I was born in Quebec in the 70s. Quebec is the French part of Canada. And at that time, in the 70s and the 80s, very clearly, people of Quebec considered themselves as part of a French society. Some wanted it to be separated from Canada, and others wanted sort of a partnership with Canada. But whether you were for independence or federalism, almost everybody considered themselves mainly as Québécois.
Mm,
And Canada was more like an insurance policy, something more related to accountability.
okay.
So there's not, maybe from the southern side of the border, we may think that there's something like a Canadian unity. But without the contribution of the late contribution of Donald Trump, you wouldn't have something like that here. It's
Hmm.
it's not really, Canada is not really a country. It's a colony meant to be exploited by at the beginning by foreign powers and now from within. But it's not meant to be a coherent country. So as a French-speaking Québécois and now living in the Acadian community, mainly we consider on a daily basis ourselves with respect to our linguistic reality. So it's my relationship with France as a student, as a scholar, were more important than with English Canada, let's say.
Mm.
And I studied in France for 15 years. I made all my work there. But of course, being a North American in France, more than a Canadian, but with that continental point of view on Europe, allowed me to understand that in North America, we might be more creative on a conceptual level. I mean, less uh, uh, engaged in traditional process. In France, it's very institutionalized.
Yes.
The steps you have to follow, the people you have to believe in, the work you have to do, the proof you have to make about yourself are a very heavy burden. And when you're traveling in Europe, you know that you will never have to share that type of involvement. you become more creative. And I had this type of relationship with philosophy that might be closer to Gilles Deleuze, let's say, or all the French intellectuals that were praised and appreciated in North America
Mm.
more than in France. I mean, all this French theory we talk a lot about in the United States were more appreciated by North Americans
Right.
than from Frenchmen. And the opposite is also true. Woody Allen was more appreciated in France than in the United States. You can understand the culture by those type of paradox. Philosophy is more for me the opportunity to study concepts and understand how concepts give you like a bit like a guitar, this type of room that allows you to give a meaning with the resonance, a meaning to an event, to a specific reality, than if you're totally dominated by it.
Right.
You have a sort of a grammar, a discourse, a mindset, and a whole structuralized approach to consider small events than if you only look at television and let you be dominated by them.
Right. I mean, it's interesting to hear what you're saying because looking at all of your work, you're right. There is this very deep desire to understand what's going on. And I think that the way that you parse it apart, but you also make it something that normal people can understand. Like it's not so esoteric that I think if you were to talk to someone, you couldn't explain it to them in a way where they could uh, fully appreciate the scale of what you're saying. I think part of what's hard with your work is the scale is so big and the problems are so large, that it's sometimes I find your work a bit shocking in that regard, where it's just sort of like, oh, these are these mega structures that cause these incredible amounts of peril and pain, and they are endemic to how we manage to do a normal industrialized society. But one thing I was wondering, and I didn't know what you'd say about this, do you think that there's a strong moral bent in your work and in your looking at things? If so, is morality subjective? And if not, how do you select the things you write about? Is it because you think they are wrong, or is it a different reason?
Uh, well, I understand three questions in what you've said.
Yes.
Uh,
Yes.
Hard ones, but I appreciate them. The first one is about uh, writing.
Mhm.
Uh, I consider the type of writing I do related to essays in the European meaning of it. And I studied with Jacques Rancière, which is a French philosopher of aesthetic and politic. And it was important for him, and for me, therefore, to consider politic as being the modality of thought related to the capacity of everyone to get involved in thinking. And this is democracy. Democracy is when you consider that uh, politic is about common issues that um, in relation with what everybody is able to comment, to think about, to understand in a specific ways. And democracy is about a certain type of thought that is related to no specific skill. It doesn't mean that we are all equal. It just means that we all have some skills to consider that war, that the territory, that the culture, that justice is about us. It's not about something theoretical or something abstract or something meant to be thought by others. And so, essay is a type of writing that um, aim to gather every type of person that is willing to make the effort to understand something. So I try not to work in a, I would say, in a journalist way, that everything is kept so simple that you lose the complexity or the background or the historical aspect of it. And I try not to be that academic so that only the few ones can get involved in the debate, let's say. And this is what essay is about. And yes, I would say that beginning in 2004 with the issue of tax havens, and then about the mining corporations, especially as being Canadians, the three mining company out of four in the world are Canadian, and it's because of the offshore status of Canada related to the mining industry. And then it was about banking and then about the oil industry. And I made a lot of conferences, speeches, and books, and radio shows, and podcasts, and so and every time came that question, yes, but what can I do? And it was always pitiful, as if everybody that were asking this question were in some way despiteful about themselves. I'm so small. I'm so little. I'm so unskilled. I'm so. And so I sort of made my own criticism, and I said, well, maybe I'm discouraging people actively when it was about gathering people and fostering, I mean, the willingness to take action, and I didn't obtain that. And it was for me a surprise to see that at the beginning of the 20th century, when Lenin was asking, what can we do? Que faire? It's a famous question that was strangely translated in English in something very complicated. But what it was discussion, what can we do? Que faire? Uh, this question at the beginning of the century, before what had to become the Soviet Union, I mean, we have to see the quote in the context. It was about involvement. It was about willingness. It was about generosity. It was about, I mean, poetry too. But there was something aesthetic in that. In that. And nowadays, when you ask the same questions, it's the burden. People are almost destroyed by the question because it's too heavy. And so 10 years ago, I decided to focus on objects of thinking that are less discouraging and more encouraging. And they may be encouraging, they can be encouraging when you take into account the reality. It's not about wishful thinking. It's about how you may, in that world, and we had to do the critic of it because in the 90s, 1990s, the bourgeoisie and the upper class was so arrogant and sure of itself and dominant ideologically. I mean, it was hard to say something back. I mean, just to respond. So it was like a tsunami of ideological proposals in the 90s. So we had to critique after the fall of the Berlin Wall. We had to work into another type of criticism, and so it had to be done. But at a certain point, it's discouraging just to see that multinationals are monstrous and that, I mean, the wealthiest are always wealthier and so on and so forth. So once it was done, it was important to say, well, in that framework, historical framework. What do we do? How do we think? How can we uh, behave? So I worked on two concepts that seem to me very intense and full of promises. And the first one is the economy. And it was important for me to recall that word economy doesn't belong to the economics. And it's the opposite. I mean, the economics appear very lately in history. After that, that word economy was central in theology, in rhetoric, in the natural sciences, in law, in literature, and the word economy is polysemic. It has a lot of meaning and is in a lot of field. It is always about putting together things that will give a good result, a relevant result. This is what economy is about. But it's related to, I mean, to history of art and to the fine cuisine and to discourses and how you make a law. And it's about what and the and I made this whole history. I don't want to do it here again in the details, but at the end of the 18th century, Adam Smith was in France and he met those who we call today the physiocrats, the first economists, the first one to say, well, we're economists, and so we deal with what we understand to be the work of nature related to agriculture, and we use it in relation with the market so that people have cereals, and Adam Smith was a bit influenced by those Frenchmen. And when he came back to Great Britain, he said, "Well, we are the economists because we'll develop this whole system and we'll call it the economy." Although that word existed in all the fields, so I wanted to recall that there will come a time related to global warming, related to loss of biodiversity, related to the way our whole world is scrambling because there will be a lack of oil, a lack of natural resources, because the 21st century will not end as it started. We'll have to face big crises. And because of that, I think that we have to redefine the word economy. It won't always be the synonym of capitalism. Economy won't always be the way for capitalism to look good, to be associated with moral terms. So, and that was the first time I tried to offer something more than just a critic or a denunciation. Uh, and the second philosophical or conceptual, let's say, object I'm working on is bioregion. And it comes from an American that moved in Nova Scotia in eastern Canada and developed that concept that was also afterward used by people in California, Peter Berg, Raymond Dasman, and all a community that created a laboratory of a bioregional laboratory in Northern California to try to see how could we manage to live according to the rules of nature, so to say, uh, in a way that politics is totally integrated to nature and law and diplomacy, and we live within the natural reality instead of exploiting it. So that was a second concept, the bioregion that now exists in Italy, in France, and in French-speaking Canada, at least. So there are theories, there are experiences, and it's about a way to react or to respond, let's say, to what's happening in the world. It would be a bad idea to say, no, I don't know, the utopian perspective that belongs to capitalism. So that technology will solve everything. We just have to do more of what destroys everything, and it all, in some way, we'll get out of it. No, it's about saying, well, we're facing a catastrophe. We do. But even though it will be hard for a lot of people, maybe it is also an opportunity, a chance to do something else. And we can take opportunity of that historical context to try to live saying, well, the more spontaneous scale of politic and the more relevant one is a regional one,
Right.
not a continental wide one. It's about what you do, where you live, with the people you belong to, in a sensible manner, with respect to a territory you need. And since you need it, you won't exploit it for an abstract market.
Right.
And you try to understand how you can be part of it in a meaningful way. This is so. And to answer the third question there was in your proposal, I would say that at the beginning I was effectively moral, saying, well, this is bad and this is good, and multinational are bad. And I do think that, but I don't think it's that relevant to approach the issue that way nowadays, saying it's bad, it's good, even though you have to maybe deal with that type of intellectual process for a while, but it was about try to understand the power of multinational corporation, the weakness of states when they are funded by multinational corporations, like in the U.S., or when they are totally consubstantially part of their project, like in Canada, which is a colonial state created by corporations. I mean, Canada is at the beginning a corporation. It's not a state. It became a state, but at the beginning it was, I mean, companies, British companies that or French companies that had monopolies here. So once you understand that and you judge it in a moral way, the way Nietzsche would not like it, then you become more ethical, not moral, but ethical. And the ethics is about which type of relationship you establish with something so that this relationship is good. What type of, it's about tactic and strategy. Well, it exists. Donald Trump exists. Multinational corporations exist. They exist. I mean, you may like them, not like them. What if you're moral, you just say it's bad, it's evil. You talk like them, and you go nowhere with that. The ethical approach, and I'm thinking obviously about Spinoza here. The ethical approach is about now. Now that you've said it, now that you've seen it, what do you do? What do you do about it? How, with on the scale you may behave? Of course, it's discouraging. Of course, you won't have the solution, but you will be able, thinking like that, at least to do something. To say, well, it will be catastrophic because this regime is sick, it's deadly, it's full of crazy people. And they have everything for them. I mean, the weapons, the army, the cars industry, the energy, the medias, they have everything except our willingness, our ability to shape sort of a new political level in which we'll consider ourselves as autonomous where we live, and we'll fight as much as we can to keep safe the bioregion where we live. This is, and it means also that in cities, people will have either to live or to change the city in order to be able to practice urban agriculture or some new approaches. And the final word about that, it will be a necessity.
Right.
It's not about choosing in an election. It will be a necessity because we live as if we had three or four planets, but
Yes.
we only have one, and it already begun. We're facing limits. We're facing them. It's physical. It's not about something intellectual. And so we'll have to react to these limits.
So my question to you is going to be, and it's going to touch on a different book of yours, but the idea of mediocrity that you discussed and the complicitness of large groups of people to no longer want to engage in critical thinking, in difficult thinking, in changes to their routine. So I agree and understand everything you said, but there seems to be a supposition that a larger piece of the populace will engage. Do you see that as likely, or do you see specifically with the desire to sort of check out that I think is complicating things, and these multinational corporations incredible efforts to divert and distract, compounded with social media, which is I would view as a multinational as well. um, how do you see that reality that you're talking about of engagement, participation, and curiosity and flexibility? How does that happen when there's such a large contingency that at least right now doesn't want to do that kind of thinking?
Well, mediocrity is about a regime that
Mhm.
asks people to work averagely.
Yes.
It's not about being incompetent or unskilled or stupid or ignorant. It's about to maintain your level of joy, your level of knowledge, your level of speed on a certain average, which is artificial. It's not an average studied by sociologists. It's an average introduced that way by powers that have the opportunity to say, this is the average. We consider that as being the average. It's an ideological average. It's not a scientific one, but it's we could say expectations from an ideological regime that asks people to be able to behave in a certain way um, that is always related to an effort.
Right.
People have to work. They work hard, and so they have the impression that since they worked hard, they accomplished something, even though it was just mediocre. I mean, mediocrity. It was just. I mean, you do nothing, and you sometimes you do things that are, as Graeber put it, bullshit jobs or stupid jobs. You know that it has any meaning, or it's related to bad things, or it destroys the planet, or it's unequal socially, or it's. And I think that what one people call sometimes populists,
Hmm.
populism, or,
Hmm.
is a bad way to react to
Okay.
that. People had enough of that. And in certain ways, they identified that type of uh, involvement in the society as being governmental,
Hmm.
as related to bureaucracy,
Right.
as if the multinational corporations didn't have bureaucracy too, and didn't have these stupid way to work or these irrelevancies in the daily basis activities. And so there was sort of confusion with mediocrity and state and taxes and everything that was effectively supported by multinational corporations as being able to put ideas in the mind of people. Uh, and and then came the far right.
Hmm.
And the far right is very strong when people doubt,
Right.
when people have anxiety, when they have in a psychological psychoanalytical meaning, they have all this uh, psychic energy active without any object. I'm full of feelings. I'm affected by all kind of feelings, but I don't know where put these feelings, where invest these feelings, so that I it will be involved in a psychological process. So you have the Far East that arrive with all kind of targets, social targets. These people are the one that fool you, dominate you, use you, and you should hate them and fight against them. And this is the beauty of it, is that it allows people to be lazy
Yes.
intellectually. You may have the impression to solve your psychological problem being lazy. You just have to say, okay, it's about Muslims, or it's about women, or it's about um, these liberals, and then you solve the problem. Not, nothing bad actually happens, or almost nothing bad. If we can get rid of these people, everything will be fine. And so you have this far right rhetoric about extermination, about elimination, about the destruction. And if you can put these people out of the way, everything should be fine, because everything's fine. There's no problem except those people. So it's and we call that the conspiracy theory. I find it a pity because there's neither theory nor conspiracy. I mean, if you're serious on a historical level, I mean,
Sure.
it's interesting to think in terms of conspiracies, because we had tens and tens of conspiracy in the Western civilization. I mean, we know that. I mean, you cannot think the French 19th century without that concept of conspiracy. It's everywhere. So, but this isn't about conspiracy. It's so theoretically weak, and it's not theory too. It's a lot of things. And this is the problem. That's why we deeply need philosophers in our world, because the concepts we use to think the reality often uh, refers to several different realities. So that conspiracy theory notion means so many things that you cannot use it properly. But one thing I would say is that often when people are uh, mighty and able to affect and influence society, they use language as we do it at wartime.
Right.
They use language as we do it as a tool. And the words lose all their meanings, as Hamlet put it. Words, words, words. It's just a tool to achieve goals, specific goals, and so that's one problem that you give to people that have sort of anxiety. You give them this a discourse.
Right.
They ask for the illusion of a solution, and then you fuel that with words that you don't believe yourself as being true, but it's just about manipulating people. And I would say again that it would be a bad idea to have a moral relationship to those people, although they may be violent. I'm in a community where there are a lot of far right people
Oh,
with big dogs, with guns, with all kind of vehicles. They like everything that is related to the oil industry. Uh, they they are. It's difficult to have access to them. They are poor, but they have a lot of skills. They know how to. They have animals. They have a garden. They know where I am on the coast side. They know the wind very well. They know how to go to the sea. And in a bioregional context, it will be very important to stay in touch with them. I
Right.
mean, just to say, I don't think they are lost. I just think that they are lost, but they are lost in the way that they don't really know what they're thinking because they don't have the historical framework to understand where it comes from.
Right.
They just need to think something, and well, the they get caught. Well, this is a certain part of the population. You have people genuinely extremists that hate, that are racist, and there's not a lot thing to do with them. But there are a lot of people that only behave in a conformist way. And the idea is to try to, well, get in touch with them and talk with them. And there's always something to do. I mean, we won't just die like this. I mean, there's always something to do. And this is what I'm trying to do. Uh, Criticizing the words we use to describe the reality, because often these words are a way to neutralize us.
Right.
Censorship nowadays doesn't work as it was under Goebbels. I mean, under Goebbels, it was clear that there were things the regime wouldn't allow you to say. Nowadays, we say to people, you're allowed to say whatever you want, but we'll give you words that are full of blanks that won't allow you to see reality in its complexity. So this is the work we have to do, and we see in the United States people near, let's say, Bernie Sanders or near Mamdani that show that with discourse, with relationships, we may turn things around. It's possible, but on other scales, not necessarily on a national scale,
Right.
but on small scales.
Thank you. I think, it's interesting to hear everything that I have seen politically. It seems like the only thing to do right now is focus on local. The only thing you can do is talk to people around you. I think the thing that's hard and that I think you do touch upon as well is just the lack of critical thinking, and then also to sort of undo these convenient mythologies. It becomes very difficult to figure out how do you talk to someone, since so much of the political system, and in a lot of ways with good reason, right, is no longer trusted. But if there's no baseline of truth, then it's very hard to build anything else, because it can all be a conspiracy theory or
Yeah,
circumspect or unknown, right? Like, we just don't seem to have a baseline of truth anymore. And I
yeah,
think that
it's
that's been to a lot of people's advantage, but it also makes the reality very skewed.
yeah. Well, one of the problems that in this ideological so-called conspiracy way to think, everybody is searching what is beyond.
Right.
Uh, and it's always about big forces using people to achieve some goals that weren't explicitly told. And um, there's two aspects in what you've just said. Um, um, the one is about acting locally.
Yeah.
Uh, it has to be very clear in everybody's mind that when you behave locally, you also behave universally.
Sure.
Because the idea is not that in a narcissistic way, me and my closest friends and my neighbors and my family will do something just to survive, and that's it.
Right.
The idea is we do it um, in a global perspective,
Yes.
knowing that some people think also that way in their own situation, and that we are doing it together, even though it's in some analogies or in some parallels. It has to be clear that the bioregional approach is something universal. If we don't want anymore to eat things that travel 2,000 kilometers, that is killing California because we are asking California too much
Yeah.
related to what California can give us,
Yeah.
or South Africa
Right.
or other places in the world. If we don't want to buy stuff that made 4 or 5 times the world because the components are made almost everywhere, well, we have to think on a local scale.
Right.
It's just coherent. But then you say, well, we are allowed to do that, and we may talk to each other to share experiences and know that we're part of a whole um, adventure worldwide. This is interesting. Interesting. Um, Doing that, I think that we shouldn't, as activists, let's say, or citizens, or people aware, uh, take on our shoulders
Mm.
the responsibility of those who want to remain blind. We don't have to share that on a psychological level.
Mm.
We may. It's always about remaining ethic.
Right.
We may talk to people that don't think with us as us and that seem us unresponsible or destructive, but we don't have to put ourselves in a sort of a situation in which we feel bad because of them. And
But what
it's more,
about collective responsibility then? Like, how
yeah,
do
we
you
have
manage
our
that then?
responsibility is to talk to them, but
Okay.
and there's a collective subject, of course,
Okay.
and we can be, of course, feel concerned about so many situations and phenomenon and realities. But it's about remaining cool, calm. Well, I don't only have French expressions here, but remaining have a bit of comment on dit ça?
What's the French expression?
Stoic,
Okay.
stoicism
Okay.
in front of that.
Okay.
And say, well, if I want to be part of the solution and behave properly, I have to remain cool and I have to remain stoic so that I can find a strategic way to create a difficult relationship with people that are lost
Yeah.
in propaganda and lost in stupidities.
Okay.
And it's a pity, but the historical reality helps us because it will be a catastrophe. And there are people in the United States that start to say, well, people lied to me in the media since 15 years because now they are telling me that the price of the eggs is lower than it is. I can see it, and it won't last that long to see that Democrats are responsible of everything. And I mean, it come at the catastrophes will be so real, and the discourse will be so poor that people will need something else, and we have to be there in a stoic way and a strategic way, and talking in a way that we take into account the problems,
Right.
but make clear that there are ecological solutions, uh, political solutions, cultural solutions, spiritual solutions, psychological solutions. Well, solutions is a big word. I don't like that word. In French, I have a much more diverse vocabulary, but you know what I mean.
I do.
It's an approach. It's a way to behave. It's disposition, and there are, and it's we see it happening here and here or there, and it it's important to see ourselves. It's a way to summarize all this uh, as being an avant-garde.
Right.
An avant-garde, it means that we are among the people that know that an ecological and social catastrophe is obvious,
Yeah.
that the globalization won't work for long, that we won't always have the Chinese being slaves, so that they provide all kind of cheap goods that we destroy and buy again. And that we needed a whole other model. And if we feel ourselves as an avant-garde, we know that there will come a time where people will have to hear because there will be a crisis. And then when there's a crisis, the idea is to be quicker than the extreme far right and to talk a language that becomes relevant. But we have to be ready to that and not just suffer because people pollute and destroy everything and think that when we're suffering, we're doing something. We do nothing when we just suffer. And so the idea is to remain minimally stoic and try to find a way to contribute to what looked like a solution.
So, okay, so this is going to lead me to a different question that I'm curious where you'll. So, I know you like Simmel. I know Simmel talks a lot about sort of the contention of sociability, democracy of equals, individuality. I know you have touched on individuality in your work as well. While individuality can be have many different permutations and meanings, right? A lot of what you're talking about is collectivization. So what I'm curious about is I do think there's an incredible importance to the individual. I do think it matters that we are able to not operate either from a mediocre standpoint or a mass thinking standpoint, and that has tremendous value. But if we need to work as a collective, how does the individual and the idea of individuality in the context I'm using, how does that then work with this? And then how does that also, with the compounded issues of what you've talked about in your books, etc., how do we find a way where there's space for people to really be themselves and to think in unique ways and to have critical thinking, but also to work as a larger organism of more people?
Usually, I don't work with the concept of individuality. I
Tell me why.
find it very poor.
Okay.
And I wasn't interested in Georg Zimmel's work related to that concept. I was more
Okay.
interested in his cultural analysis related to money and
Okay.
economy, and that. I find it very poor. But I think that it's a problem when the extreme far left of
Mm-hmm.
things we consider individuals as being almost nothing. I mean, but I mean, I would just simply say that if you want to be an individual
Yeah.
and you understand what it means, you need a lot of courage. I mean, almost nobody is an individual. I mean, it means that you think your way, you have your proper language, you wear whatever you want,
Yeah.
you decide things without any kind of influence. It's a fiction.
Okay.
The individuality as a pure notion or as a pure reality is a fiction. You always behave as being part of a whole. And it is funny to say that individualism is a cultural reality. I mean, it's in a specific culture that you are told that you're an individual
Well,
and that you
here,
behave like it.
it's a huge problem in America. And I think that you're right, but I think part of the reason I wanted to ask the question is because in America, there's such a value placed on being an individual. Never mind if your individuality is actually part of just a larger destructive group, right? But there's this idea that you're you, and there's this incredible value to just you being yourself, to the loss and destruction of so many other things that you actually need. So in that way, that idea I think is specifically here incredibly problematic. And I
Yeah,
think it's used in a very destructive way without the people who the citizens, the normal people who use it understanding that being an individual is not carte blanche to do whatever you want however you want, and that also you are working within a superstructure still. So I please go on, but I think that this point is relevant especially here.
yeah, absolutely. But in the United States, there's also we the people. And there's also the church, and there's
Sure.
also the all kind of gathering in football stadium or and but you're right. I mean, we see that as foreign people, we see that social phenomenon, and the way I try to explain that phenomenon to myself is to
Yeah.
say that um, mainly Americans uh, are still at old mindset, are like stuck in the mindset of Thomas Paine,
Hmm.
when Thomas Paine was struggling against a foreign power, which is a metropole, a colonizer, and the sentence "no taxation without representation" was about being able to be socially responsible of what you do. And if you have to pay taxes to a certain power, you have to feel represented by that power and feel that you have an access to it. And it wasn't the case. But it's like it's something very childish, actually. It's like a bit like if we focused on that period of time of the American history and said, well, since we lived that, it's the basis of every kind of political thinking. It's very poor and it's very childish. It's sort of a psychological regression.
Yeah.
Say, well, we'll always see a political power as being a threat because when we thought it the first time, it was a threat.
Right.
And so everything, I mean, we're so quickly a communist in the United States. It's, I mean, if you think that the community should be structured so that when you are in big problems, big trouble, well, some kind of structure will help you being cured, being supported. We see it as something communist. I mean, it's incredible. I mean, we can barely believe what we hear,
Yeah.
but it exists, and of course, there's a lot of work to do. I hope, I hope that since we'll experiment the limits, and since we have people like Mamdani or Sanders or AOC that are there to talk about socialism, that there will be at least a complexity,
Yeah.
a scale with different possibilities, some of the scope of possibilities. And I hope that Trumpism will destroy itself
Yeah.
because that kind of uh, annoying discourse usually drops. I mean, it never ends good. It's never easy. It's sometimes catastrophical, but it ends in a very sudden way. And there will be appeal for something else. I hope. I do hope. But it's only hope
No, I know. And I
at
think
that
that's
point.
what's so hard, right? And also, I don't know, have you looked into the governor of New Mexico, by the way? She's made a lot of really interesting things go on in that state. And I don't know if you've looked into it, but I watch her and I think a lot of what she's doing very quietly is actually very interesting.
I put it down.
So okay, I want to do a slight pivot because a lot of what you do also my big wonder is why people are so disinclined to see the cost of what's going on to themselves on a very personal level, especially in a place like America where the individual is so stressed. So, tax havens. Tax havens are a huge problem. To give a little bit of a preamble, basically half the world's money is held in offshore accounts. The money is not taxed. An enormous part of capitalism happens in between the the companies within the giant multinational, which are then also not taxed or are redistributed towards other pieces of a company rather than going into the external world. What is the social cost of tax havens? You mentioned five major costs in several different discussions that you had, but also why is this not an issue that the individual and that the citizen has a greater investment in? Because because that money's not going back on the state and the federal level. It's not going back into programs, into roads, into libraries, into all these things that are part of our basic social contract. And it doesn't seem to be an issue. So I'm curious if you could speak to some of that, as well as the lack of ideological thought about what this means. Not on your end, I mean, in terms of society.
Hmm. Hmm. Well, it's true that the social costs are several, and we acknowledge them by being uh, driven by a qualitative approach and not a quantitative one. And this is already a challenge because every time it's about economics, people think that it's about numbers. And since I worked a lot on tax havens, I was often asked, well, what's the cost? How much dollars do we lose collectively? Well, if we do it quickly, of course, there's a huge amount of money that state don't tax because it's fueled elsewhere. So we don't tax the window. So there's a lack of money in the public coffers. And then when we do tax multinational assets or income, well, we lower the tax rate because the country make as if they were in competition with tax havens. So since 1980, all countries lowered their the corporate tax rate. And then you have, well, the difficulties for a country to balance the budget. And since they don't do it, well, they borrow money from financial institutions that don't pay tax. So it works upside down. So the citizens are paying the interest of a debt that is created by the fact that states don't tax these corporations anymore. Then you have the middle class tax rates that is higher than it's supposed to be. So it's a cost too. And as you put it, then you have, well, less public investment in uh, all kind of social domains, and it's especially uh, a loss for women because women are often hired by public institutions for services that are provided to women especially. So they lose on both sides. Pierre Bourdieu, the French sociologist, talked a lot about that. And then you have, well, the fact that states ask money for any kind of service. You want to take a bus, you want to go to a university, and you have to pay as something you purchase, so you buy. And so on and so forth. And sociologically, you can go as far as you want. There's all kind of tiny effects. So the costs are huge. If you want to imagine the effect, you can work upside down and say, well, if we were in a world where there's no tax haven, no Bermudas, no Bahamas, no Luxembourg, no Delaware, if you want to work, then you'll ask yourself, well, let's say, well, how would it be? Well, multinational corporations would pay their fair share of tax. People would pay less tax. Money would be invested in social programs. We will have a better social situation. Maybe we could go to an hospital without being in debt, and so on and so forth. So you say, wow, it's almost an utopia. So, what are the solutions, as we say? Well, it's clear for me that one of the strategies that were used by states that are responsible of a problem they present they present as if it was for them uh, a challenge, although they are the architect of all this. Um, one of the one of the problems is that they talk about it in technical terms,
Mm.
saying, "Oh, we'll go to the OECD and we'll talk to Pascal Saint-Amand, which has to deal with the problem for us. And we will try to integrate 200 fiscal system. Can you imagine how complicated it is? 200 fiscal system that we have to synthesize so that everything will run. It's so, it doesn't work that way. I mean, um, the idea is that diplomatically, every Western state, with let's say member of the OECD, should see tax havens as doing political interference in their affairs. Because when in the Bahamas, you know that every corporation is related to a law. To have a corporation or a certain type of structure, you need a law that allows this structure to exist. Well, in the Bahamas or in the Bermuda, the law says that if you want to create, let's say, an exempted company or international business company, it's called that way. If you want to create one, you have to have no activity on the territory of the country. So you create something that is not in the country, but related to the political institution and the jurisdiction, so that you can say to your own country and to your tax system, well, this money belongs to a structure that is operating under the law of the Bahamas.
And
And
it
in the
doesn't
Bahamas,
benefit
they will
them.
say, do anything you want, but I don't want to know anything about what's happening there. So you create sort of a buffer. And it's a bit like if the two hands of Adam Smith, the inevitable hands, in the line between the countries had created a buffer uh, of trillion, tens of trillions of dollars in which capitalism is managed. So what can we do? I think that media's, at least in France, in Europe,
Yeah.
in Canada, especially in French Canada, did some work, some serious work during 20 years. Usually I criticize media, but we have to say that on that level, on that question, medias did a certain work. I mean, there was this international organization that revealed a lot of scandals in the Panama Papers, the Bahamas papers, the Pandora Papers, and so on and so forth. So they had a lot of revelation, a lot of work was done on specific actor, but medias were always unable or unwilling to do relationships with that and other type of problems. It was like
Silos.
something isolated for
Yeah.
inclusion. Uh, and when a minister, or as we say, a secretary in the US, was saying, well, we don't have any money for this, we don't have any money for that. Well, you had journalists saying, it's true, we don't have money, doesn't appear on trees, and so on and so forth, all those. But it's very rare that you'll find someone in the media saying, well, if there isn't, there, it's not only a problem of spending, it's a problem of income. And if state cannot spend money, it doesn't have, it's because it doesn't have the money and what it should have the money. And this is the problem. And I worked a lot during 15 years, especially very actively in France and in Quebec with others. So that at least in the Francophonie, we could have that debate and that the topic would be. And mainly my discourse was to say, talk about it every time you may and every time you have to do it. Tax havens is not only a question among others. It's like environment. It's everywhere, and everywhere you talk about something, it's about schools, about hospitals, about culture, about roads, about territory, about anything. You have to raise the issue of tax havens because you will always be told that there isn't enough money, always, and this is and well, I cannot say that it was successful. I tried and I tried and I tried. And at the end, when I was going to French-speaking medias in France, in Belgium, or in Quebec, or in Acadie, um, journalists were already knowing what I was going to say. So, oh, there's this new scandal, so we'll call him and he will say, as always, that blah, blah, blah. And they were finishing my sentences. I mean, and I said, oh, we need someone else. We need another face. We need another tone. We need another voice. And that's why I started to work about more creative and positive concepts like economy.
So, one thing you did say is tax havens were shaped by those who pretend to criticize them. And I thought that that was a really interesting quote because when I look at the Democratic Party here, I see so many of our troubles, I feel, come out of the way that the Democrats have been bought and paid for systemically over such a long amount of time, and that their corporate interests in a lot of ways are not very divergent from the Republicans. I don't know if you'll agree, but that's my experience. And
Mhm.
so what I look to then is we have a two-party system. But if one party is like non-functional, let's say, or so corrupt that there's no path, the second party, which I think is also fundamentally completely corrupt as well, and will do what is in their interest, meaning those in power, but not in the interest of the people they represent. Philosophically, if there's no real fundamental party for the people, what then are the opportunities to occur? And if things like socialism and capitalism, I mean, socialism and communism have been so sort of tainted as words, not as ideas, but as words. I know you're saying that on a local level you talk to people, but I'm wondering is there then an opening for a different party, a different name, a different approach, which really would be an amalgam of the original intent of a lot of these approaches. But like, is there a discourse that reshapes these ideologies that then becomes approachable again? Because there's got to be
Mhm.
another option because these options aren't working.
Well, it's two separate realities. When I talk about acting locally, it's about bioregional approach with respect to the ecological crisis we're in. When we talk about tax havens, then, well, yeah, we have to face a reality as a national and international issue. It's not about talking to your neighbor, even though it's interesting. When I took a cab, I was always talking about tax havens just to try to spread the word. But it's true that it's something a bit disparate. Um, there's an opportunity with tax haven on a rhetoric basis.
Mm,
Rhetorically, it's interesting to see that if powerful people don't talk about tax haven, it's because it's shameful. It's very hard to excuse that. To say,
mm,
I'm asking you to pay taxes, but if you're wealthy, I'll give you all the loopholes you need to avoid taxation. It doesn't go with the principle of the liberty and duties you have in a country. Well, um, so, and tax havens are meant to be this confidential.
mm.
Now, we shouldn't talk together at this moment about tax havens. They exist so that we don't talk about them.
Okay.
And every time you talk about them, it's like showing a ghost. It shouldn't be seen.
Mm,
And because it's the dirty part of capitalism, because it's not only about taxation, it's about drug dealing,
right,
arms dealing,
right.
it's about corruption, it's about destruction, it's about money laundering.
Yeah.
It's about the criminal aspect of multinational corporations that sell weapons or corrupt officials abroad. It's the unconsciousness of capitalism. It's the field where you repress everything.
Right.
Oh. And so corporations don't want you to talk about that, never, never, and politicians too.
Mm,
And yeah, tax havens were created by Western countries, and one of the major country that helped tax havens to exist is Canada. Canada, the and against the will of the United States of America in the 70s before Ronald Reagan. You have to understand historically that there are strong relationships between Canada and the Caribbeans, even at the time of New France. For all kind of reasons, there are commerce, I mean, the trade and so on. And well, and in the 19th century, Canada, which is a funny country, Canada has a lot of realities. It's hard to understand. It's very a complex country, Canada. Canada was a colony itself, but it was also a subcontractor of London with respect to the Caribbeans. So London was asking Canadian bankers of Halifax in the 19th century to manage the financial aspect of the Caribbean colonies. So you had Canadian banks, a merchant bank, the Scotia Bank, merchant bank, which is now the Royal Bank of Canada, that was uh, creating money in the Caribbeans, dealing with debts and almost managing the colonies. And Canada was sort of a banking offshore country for Americans because until I think since the 1930s, American banks had to invest within the United States. It
Right.
wasn't legal to invest abroad because the United States wanted to develop their own land. So Canadian banks offered loopholes for American investors to invest in the Caribbean, and that's why Canadian banks were among the wealthiest of the United States at that moment because they had this, I mean, way, this channel to get access to the Caribbeans, United Fruit and so on. And after the Second World War, you had the Marshall Plan that spread American dollars abroad. Americans didn't give money; they printed money. It didn't say, "Oh, okay, we'll lose money to give it to you." They just print dollars that, and they send it abroad so that the American multinational would have big, huge contracts in Europe and in Asia. But you had these euro dollars that were in circulation without any kind of public control. And then Canadians used these Caribbean British colonies to shape tax havens. To say, well, we'll concentrate these euro dollars in our Canadian banks in the Caribbean so that there will be no type of public supervision. And then happened the financial planet, what we called afterward the financial planet. And also in the US, Al Capone was caught for fiscal reasons. And Meyer Lansky and others understood that they had to manage their wealthy activity abroad. And Canadian bank opened their coffer to that type of business. And if I want to summarize all this in a sentence, in the 60s, the I mean, the Bahamas is like a tiny city, but it has the jurisdictional power of a country. And you had the same person that was Minister of Finance and Minister of Tourism. Minister of Finance to welcome the euro dollars by trillions, and Minister of Tourism to supervise the hotel and casinos related to the American dirty money. And that guy, Sir Stafford Sands, that was at the same time Minister of Finance and Minister of Tourism, was also member of the board of the Royal Bank of Canada in Toronto, okay, or in Montreal. And so everything is said. And so countries like Canada shape this financial environment. And now the fake that they want to struggle against it and fight it, and it's all theater.
So if both parties in power sort of unilaterally, to not everyone but most of them are bought and paid for, if most of them are corrupted with the same fruit, what what are the options for a third party? Or do you think there's not an option because the language around a third party has been so unfairly sort of polluted and disregarded? Like, is there an option for something else?
Well, Democrats and Republicans in the US are like liberals and conservative in Canada.
Mm-hmm.
And I used to say that a liberal is a conservative with a smile. And it's the same, I think, with Democrats and Republicans. According to business,
Yes.
they smile, they look friendly. That's it. Um, and they
Because language
also,
matters. Like, I'm curious, is there a linguistic
yeah.
option? Is there a
Well,
philosophical
I
option?
I worked in the 1990s with an Africanist called François-Xavier Verschave, and he was saying always, we win throughout our losses.
Mm-hmm.
And when we achieve something, like there's this global tax on the multinational corporations of 15% because Joseph Biden wanted it since a few years. So now there's this tiny achievement. It's interesting on the legal perspective more than on a tax perspective because for the first time, multinational corporations are considered as a legal subject.
Right.
And before that, it wasn't the case. I mean, Coca-Cola doesn't exist as such. What exists is hundreds of subsidiaries worldwide, and they behave as if they were independent one from another. This is why they can be so successful. Why when they circumvent the different tax systems of the world. So there was that, and what he was meaning is that if you're politically involved, you don't have, you need uh, to face failures. You need to feel comfortable with defeats. You need to understand that you'll achieve something while putting pressure on powers that are able to defeat you. And it's a paradox that if you are involved politically, it is because you are discouraged.
Right.
It's because there is no solution that you're involved politically. Because when there's a solution at a problem, well, you refer yourself to the solution and you solve the problem and you don't do politics.
Right.
You're involved in politics when something is so big, so huge, so important, so it's so a concern that you have to tell yourself that there might be a way to solve the problem, even though it's undirect. It's with collaboration, with pressure, and it's because you're in that relationship because between being discouraged and being courageous that you get involved in politics. But you need to tell yourself that you will lose more than you will win. And it's normal because you give yourself huge challenges and huge goals. And because you have great understanding of what a human being might be, and because you have great expectations about what human beings can do collectively, you you give yourself collectively goals that are hard to achieve. But you can be encouraged by saying that you tend in the right direction doing that. And that's why I think, to be more concrete, that if we still talk about tax havens every time we can, In a way or another, there will be a time when, in a specific context, because we will have talked a lot about it, that a politician, someone a bit special that has power, will say, that's unfair. That's an issue. That's a problem. It's the main problem. We should fix it. I'm surprised that Bernie Sanders talked so little about it.
Right.
And so, and it's part of his, it would be a great element of his discourse if it would have been more present. And thing might change. It was interesting in the eight. You can look at the movie documentary Yannick Kergoat did on that, La très grande évasion, the very great evasion, and it's about the fact that in during the financial crisis in 2008, tax havens became for 2, 3 years a serious topic among the Western leaders. And even Barack Obama had a great discourse about this building in the Bermuda that has hundreds of multinational corporations representations. And he said, well, it might be the highest building in the world. And he showed himself as being willing to fight against the phenomenon, and afterward, nothing. But I mean, there was, we failed. We need to fail a lot of time to achieve something. It's throughout failures and defeats and loss that we'll achieve something. It has to be very clear in our mind. It's not about being optimistic. If I had the talent of Friedrich Nietzsche, I would work an essay entitled "Beyond Pessimism and Optimism." As you work, I don't know what's the English title, "Beyond Good or Bad."
Maybe.
Par-delà le bien et le mal in French.
Right.
So anyhow, I think it's we're stronger if we don't expect short-term wins.
All right. I know I've taken a lot of your time. I have one more question and then we go to the lightning round. Is that okay? So
Yes.
my final question is going to be about your book Noir Canada. Um, just to give a little preface, it was the book ran into an enormous amount of legal problems. I think sort of something no one had really seen before, where the mining corporations that you spoke about sued you and sued you and sued you and your publishers to the point where I believe eventually you had to withdraw the book. I think what was striking to me about that is the degree to which the legal systems totally failed you. I don't know if that would be what you would say, but what I wonder is, having had that intimate an experience with a book that was based on fact, that told the truth, and that held to account very powerful people who had done great wrongs. And at the end of the day, you had to withdraw because of the level of financial pressure that they could put on you, even though you did not misrepresent or lie. How do you now understand the legal system, what it can do, what it can't do, and what kind of tool it actually is?
Corrupt. No, the legal system is corrupt by money. And there's a word that says it all. It's I don't know if we use it that way in English. I think it is. It's a word of client. My client.
Yes.
Uh, we have to recall that um, these relationships occur in a field related to justice and law. And all the terminology is related to law, except one, client.
Right.
It's not a legal, specifically legal term. It's an economical term. When are you a client? You're a client when you can purchase a service. So it's a bit, for us in Canada or for people in Europe, it's very shocking. In the US, there are so many inequalities that maybe you got used to that. But it's a bit like if we go to a public hospital and would have to finance the person that would be able to speak to the doctor so that we have services. So we all finance that system, but you have to provide that specific amount of money to have access to it, really. So it seems to me very clear that the legal system is corrupt by money. It's not about envelopes that are given, I don't know how, to judges. It's not that spectacular, but it's just about that all decisions are tactics, strategies, expertise are related to money. Are you able to finance your presence in a courtroom? Um, but I would say, well, Noir Canada, if you look at a work that has been done by associations that are interested in the books that were censored in the world, Noir Canada is the only book that was ever censored in Canada.
Really?
And also, daily paper, French daily paper Le Monde said that it was the most expensive book in the world because Barry Gold and Barry Corporation sued me and my two researchers and my publisher for $11 million for having released the book as damages. And well, the only thing I can say is that Noir Canada is a book that is supported by one fact. It's a bibliography.
Hmm.
I mean, gathered tens and tens and tens of reports, books, documentary reports, representations made in political assemblies and commissions and whatever you can imagine, UN reports. And so I gathered all that and I said, well, there's enough to create an independent inquiry commission in Canada.
Yeah.
It was the thesis of the book. There is enough clues or datas or elements to create a commission to know exactly what's what is about all these corporations. And it's funny because in these elements there was a UN report uh, by expert mandated by the Security Council that went into Congo. In Congo, they quote Canadian corporations and other corporations related to mining industry, involved in the civil war there, a terrible war. And they said themselves, as expert mandated by the UN, we don't have the means to inquire. It should be done by states
Mm.
where these corporations are registered. So if a UN expert doesn't have the means to inquire, why an independent researcher, as I was at that time, would have it then? So it's so clear that, and I think that this file, this Barry Gold affair, uh, was for the legal system a hot potato, something that nobody want to even lawyers, all judges, clerks. At the end, it was something people didn't want to deal about.
Were
So,
you
so,
surprised? Did you expect this response, or this was anomalous to you?
uh, the economy of thinking of the legal system is about specific situation. If you take the whole involvement of Canadian corporations in Africa and you ask a judge to think something about it, I mean, methodologically, it's impossible. And so, and you see how weak the legal system is intellectually. And I was surprised to see how arrogant are often the jurists when in reality, they know very little about the world. They know a lot about their tiny specific field with all kind of strange way to think and weird strategies, and they are like in their own world. But the world in its complexity is too big for them, often, and too big for their intellectual tools. And I still think that the initiative of Barry Gold to sue us was a mistake, a strategical mistake. At that time, there were a lot of books, I said it previously, about capitalism because it was important since the fall of the Berlin Wall to criticize the way capitalism was evolving. There are a lot of corporations like Monsanto who didn't sue people. There are journalists are because they didn't want to have bad publicity. And this is exactly what happened. And what happens when people are sued for defamation by a huge multinational corporations? It's about who will use the other one as an example. So Barry Gold wanted to use me as an example to all those who would criticize them, and they did it also for the Guardian in Great Britain or elsewhere, in the United States too. Sierra Club, I think. I'm not sure about that, but there were a lot of targets, and it was about using people as example. If you do like this one, the same thing will happen to you. So don't talk negatively about us. So it's a chill effect. But it works also the other way around because we were saying to all multinational corporations, if you do like Barry Gold and sue an independent researcher that I was at that time and a small publisher, well, the same thing will happen to you. You will have very bad press. And at the time, it was true. Nowadays, I don't know if it would be so easy, but at the time, it was true. And so, what I can see is that afterward, I still criticize Barry Gold, but I'm not aware of lawsuits they would have launched after the story of North Canada.
So it's a win. In one way or another, that was a win.
Well, as intellectuals, what we wanted to do is to raise awareness
Yes.
about the problems related to the Canadian mining industry in the world, and we achieved that. And I think that I talked more about Barry Gold after the trial, well, the settlement, than Barry Gold sued intellectuals.
Right. I mean, again, it's all of this is very compelling.
Just at one point, Barry
sorry.
Gold was just a corporation among a lot that were mentioned, and they put the attention on them, even though it was a book on the mining industry with a lot of examples. But it wasn't about them specifically, but maybe they when they sent us legal letters, they didn't have read the book yet.
But I mean, also, even if there's many other iterations, right? One can extrapolate if they did this, then the other iterations did it as well. So to a certain extent, they just serve to facilitate the greater conversation, regardless. But again, I mean, I hope my questions were not too
Thank you.
facile. I
No,
wanted
thanks
to
a
do
lot.
stuff because my hope is when people listen, they're curious, and they start to think like, okay, what if I look into this? What if I think about this? What if I expand my ideology just a little bit, right?
Mhm.
And maybe something can change.
Well, thanks a lot. Of course, there's the linguistic barrier, but that
You
was
were
faced to
fantastic.
people.
You
Yeah,
were wonderful. You
thank you.
did a fabulous job. I really, really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank
And
you a
thank you
lot.
for all of your time. And, again, if I can ever be of any use, let me know.
Okay, well, let's stay in touch.
Please. Thank you very much, Alan.
Thank
Take
you.
care.
Bye.